Several people have asked, who's this Brandon person? How does he know so much? What doesn't he know? Where does he come from? Who has he worked for? So fine, here's the really fast version. I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and that's where I get most of the mechanical stuff, the how to fix things that are physical, wiring, soldering, welding, changing car parts, those kinds of things. But I learned those things on the farm, so sometimes they're jury-rigged, sometimes the way I do them is not the most safe way for other people doing them. But, you know, all those people are like, oh, you had the sparks flying from wiring the house, you almost died. I didn't almost die, trust me. Almost died is you stuck your hand in the combine and you didn't have the combine turned all of the way off, and so it almost ate your hand. Where I grew up from, if you made it to 12th grade and you had all of your fingers, you were a successful child and your parents did just fine. I could type going into kindergarten, which was a feat because that would have been in 1984 when most people didn't have access to computers or typewriters or any of those kinds of things. I learned programming by memorizing basic programs, and I would play games, and before I could play the game I had to type in all the lines of the code for the game. And then I started working on, hey, I could change the graphics or the rules of the game by changing the program, and so that was how I kind of got into programming. My first run-in with the law enforcement was the FBI showed up at my doorstep in 1987. I was in 3rd grade. I had written some hard drive encryption algorithms that a hacker had used, and apparently they were stronger encryption than what was legal at the time, and the FBI came to ask me how they unencrypted the hard drive, and I said, you don't. And they said, that's not possible. And at the time it wasn't possible. And so that was my first run in the law. I was sitting in a 3rd grade classroom and the FBI knocked on my doorstep, and I went down to the principal's office with the FBI. Yeah, that was a fun day. Then I did a number of years where I was in high school and doing physics engines for games and AI for games, everything from chess engines to physics engines for flight sims to AI for flight sims and first-person shooters. I made some hacks for Wolfenstein 3D that let you play 2 players split screen racing through a maze or shooting at each other. That was a pretty fun little game mod for Wolfenstein that I put together. And I would do physics engines for flight sims. That was a lot of fun. You basically took really complex math from fluid dynamics and then modeling with airplanes, and you boiled those down into simpler versions of algorithms based on what was going on. You said, if the flight speed is between this and the altitude is this, then here is the formula that you need to use for these various things. And you basically had all of these tables, and these tables translated to stuff so that you didn't have to do as much math on the fly. You could just look up a number and say, close enough. And AI at the time was a lot of fun because you did these things that made it seem like you had very complex AI that was really simple AI that you were faking. So like flight sim, you'd say, hey, I've got somebody and they're at my 5 o'clock from behind at a range of X number of yards, and so the right thing to do is an Immelman, and you do this Immelman, and when you pulled out of it, you'd be behind the guy and you'd blow him up, and that was awesome. But if you did it wrong, then you just said, okay, the guy is now at this spot, run the next choice, and you could just keep doing that. And it worked most of the time, but every so often you'd pick something and you wouldn't have done the math right, and there'd be a range of mountains ahead of you and you'd crash into the range of mountains because you hadn't done the altitude check beforehand, and that was a lot of fun. Then just after high school, I went into college for a little while, did some networking type stuff, but ended up getting kind of burned out and went to work for a camp where I was a high ropes and climbing director, where I built team building obstacles and took people through the 40-foot high ropes course and built a climbing wall called Goliath. And that was a lot of fun. It was very different than what I'd done, and I had abs of steel at the time from spending 16 hours a day in a climbing harness. I was doing kickboxing about then, which is how I wrecked my teeth. Don't ever do kickboxing if you value your teeth. And that's the reason I have this slightly black tooth, is that it's got a small crack and it's been getting darker and darker, and in the past year it got a lot darker very fast. So I'll get it fixed. I just haven't had time, because in order to get it fixed, they have to pop it out and do some stuff, and like 4 days I won't have a tooth and I'll look really bad. And I keep doing videos and meetings and things like that, and so I just haven't wanted to take the time, because a little gray tooth is better for most people than having no tooth at all for 4 days. So then Y2K started to hit, and with Y2K I said, hey, there's going to be a lot of money in fixing people's Y2K issues, so I jumped on that bandwagon and wrote some scripts that said what software is running on this computer, what things need upgraded, do the upgrades, and go on to the next one. And so I could do 100+ computers a day because of the scripts that I'd written, which at a couple, like $150 to $200 per computer, you could make some really good money in a day. So that was great. And most of those clients were colleges, so I got into the distance learning type things, which is how I got into the video space. And through a series of video things, I became one of the experts in video compression and audio compression. And that led me to developing some 2D to 3D technology back in 2001, 2002. That was so computationally intensive that it wasn't until about 2 years ago that it was even feasible to run it. Even now it takes forever to run on content, but it's one of the best 2D to 3D conversion softwares that's out there. And I've licensed bits of it to various companies. I also worked a lot on audio with audio virtualization, audio spatialization, doing things with converting stuff from stereo to surround, from surround to 2 speakers that sound like they're 5 or 6, to doing audio localization, a whole bunch of those kinds of things. Audio compression enhancement, where you go through and say, I know that this little squeak or this little pop is from the compression. How do I take it out? How do I identify those things as opposed to the sounds that are supposed to be in there? I then moved out to Silicon Valley to join a company called Akimbo that was kind of the very first Netflix of watch video over the internet on a little set-top box. And that was a lot of fun, but they were too early, so their box cost too much. They didn't have enough content because the studios hadn't ever figured out that, hey, we should be putting this content on the internet. What does the license work like? Kind of like when DVD came out and Disney didn't know how much to pay the actors and the musicians for the royalties because they'd said VHS, but they'd never done DVD. All sorts of strange things around that. So when they didn't quite make it, I went to work for Microsoft. I worked in Microsoft Media Room, which became Microsoft IPTV, that became Microsoft Media Room, that powers AT&T Uverse, and a couple of other technologies. And my goal there was to take video signals and all the international formats and say, okay, does our box work with NTSC? Yes. Okay. Does it work with the Japan version of NTSC called NTSC-J? Yes. Does it work with the Argentinian version of NTSC? No. Does it work with CCAM? No. But we can fix it. Here's what we have to do. Does it work with PAL? Does it work with its PAL variant? Does it work with all sorts of captions and teletext and other signaling format stuff? And that was a lot of fun. And I did that with Jake. We worked together at Microsoft in a portion of Microsoft called the Media Encoding Resource Lab for IPTV Networks, which is Merlin, which is a group that I helped found. And that was a lot of fun. But then I got into SEO and reputation management, and I worked with some big companies on getting them more internet traffic, and I worked with some bad people about making the things that were said about them on the internet go away. And that was kind of fun. And then I came here to LockerGnome, and along the way I've worked at Howcast and DMC and Winov and Nine Systems, and had clients that included Universal Studios and iTunes and a whole bunch of people. The GE, Indianapolis Speedway, a whole bunch of people. Virgin Mobile. So it's been a lot of fun with a lot of different companies over the years, and I've gotten to play with a lot of different technologies in a lot of different places. No, I don't know everything. I suck at knitting. I suck at golf. I pretty much suck at fly fishing. Yeah, and so that's quite a bit about me, and hopefully that answers some of your questions.